Bazille is the latest instrument from soft synth legends Yuhi. It's an incredibly powerful semi-modular synth that boasts some intriguing sound design possibilities. Every sound in this demo track, apart from the beats, was created with Bazille, and only minimal effects like high-pass filtering or sidechain compression were used to process them. We'll be reviewing Bazille in CM213, and you can download a demo version to try it right now from www.yuhi.com. The synth has 4 oscillators which have FM, phase distortion, and innovative fractal resonance capabilities, which allows them to create a huge array of timbres. The multiplex panel allows you to add and multiply signals, making it possible to perform ring and amplitude modulation, and the filter panel features dual analog style self-resonating multi-mode filters plus 2 auxiliary filters. On the modulation front, Bazille includes 2 LFOs, 4 envelopes, a polyphonic modulation sequencer, 2 mapping generators, 2 lag generators, and 2 ramp generators. There are also inverter, rectifier, quantize and sample and hold modules, a built-in effects section with distortion, delay, phaser and spring reverb, and the ability to use up to 8 stacked voices. There's a lot going on in Bazille, so let's make a sound from scratch to see how it works. Here we have a freshly initialized instance of Bazille. Let's start by checking out the oscillator's phase distortion capabilities. The phase distortion section has 2 waveform slots that define the shape of the wave. Currently the first is set to saw and the second is set to same, which means it simply duplicates the shape selected in the first slot. If we change the shape in the second slot to square, for example, we can see in the oscilloscope that the oscillator's output alternates between saw and square shapes with each cycle. Turning the PD parameter down reduces the amount of phase distortion, and as such the harmonics disappear and the signal tends towards a sine wave at the fundamental frequency. When used like this, it gives us results very similar to a low-pass filter. The slot below the wave shape sets the basic oscillator waveform before phase distortion. This is set to cosine by default, and it can also be set to either of the mapping generators. By default, the first mapping generator is set to a triangle shape, the second to a complex wave shape with a lot of harmonics. Let's see what they sound like. Here's the triangular mapping generator 1. You can edit the mapping generators in real time. Here's what mapping generator 2 sounds like. It's pretty filthy, and we can make it sound even gnarlier by turning the phase distortion level back up. Let's modulate the phase distortion amount with an LFO. Bazille's modular routing is fairly straightforward. Red connectors are outputs and grey connectors are inputs. To modulate the phase distortion with an LFO, we drag from the shape we want to use in the LFO panel, here we're using a triangle saw, and we drag it to the input of the parameter we want to modulate, in this case oscillator 1's phase distortion. The modulation amount is determined by the knob above the input, so let's turn this up to its maximum. We can control the speed of the LFO with the rate knob and morph between the saw and triangle shapes with the wave knob. Let's try out the oscillator's FM functions. We'll use oscillator 2 as our modulator and oscillator 1 as our carrier. We drag oscillator 2's output to oscillator 1's FM input and turn up the modulation amount a little. This gives oscillator 1 an even richer timbre. Naturally, changing the pitch of oscillator 2 will change the timbre of the FM modulation. If we put oscillator 2 in overtone mode, this gives us a wider range of octaves to play with, and we can get some really piercing sounds. The overtones mode allows us to select a particular harmonic to use, and oscillators can also be set to undertones, subharmonics, hertz, or clocked, which syncs the waveform to host tempo. To use the oscillator's fractal resonance capabilities, we simply select a waveform and turn up the amount. This can also be modulated to get a hard sync-like effect, but we've already got a very rich sound, so let's move on and check out the modulation options afforded by Bazille's multiplex panel. To perform ring modulation, we disconnect the output from the Oscillator 1 panel and connect it to one of the multiplex panel's ins. Then we connect Oscillator 3's output to the multiplex mod in and connect the multiplex's out to the out panel. Oscillator 3 is now ring modulating Oscillator 1. To make the effect as obvious as possible, we'll whack the oscillator's volume, phase distortion and semitone detune all the way up. Switching to amplitude modulation is easy. Just plug Oscillator 1 into the right hand side rather than the left. These knobs allow us to fade between the original and modulated signals. Like Uhi's smaller modular synth Ace, Bazille doesn't differentiate between modulation and audio signals, so it's possible to mix audio and modulation signals with the multiplex and use modules in non-traditional ways. To fatten the sound up even further, we can use Bazille's voice stacking capabilities. In the Tweaks and FX panel, we simply set the number of stacked voices to 8 and boom, we get a huge punchy sound. If you don't like the percussive nature of the stack, you can simply set Oscillator 1 to free running so it doesn't restart on each new note. To do this, set the phase mode in the Oscillator 1 panel to random. To use the synth's filter, we have to manually route the signal through it. So we unplug the multiplex output from the out and route it through the filter panel instead. Different filter modes are selected by using a different output. Here we're opting for a 6 dB low pass. We can use a signal modulation source to feed multiple inputs, so let's use LFO1 to modulate the filter cutoff too. Bazille's sequencer can be used as a pretty sophisticated modulation source. The various outputs can be used for 4, 8, 12 and 16 step sequences. Here we're using it to modulate the filter cutoff frequency. The sequencer's large dial is used to switch between the 8 available sequences. The rotate knob can be used to sweep automatically through the sequences. Because Bazille is a modular synth, the modulation signal output by the sequencer can be shaped by the other modules. For instance, by routing the signal through the lag generator, we can make the modulation move more smoothly. finally, using Bazille's built-in effects is as easy as turning them on in the FX panel. You can even change their order by dragging them around, and if it gets a bit loud you can avoid clipping the master by turning the synth's output level down. We've only shown you a fraction of what Bazille is capable of, but hopefully this should give you an idea of what it's like to use and the amazing quality of the results it delivers. For more info on Bazille or to get the demo, visit www.uhi.com and make sure you check out our review in CM213.